And coming our way next, we shall address a segment which has become a household name. And that segment is called In Dialogue. The popular host of In Dialogue is the well-known Mr. Bharat Bhargava. Well, you know what? Looking at this segment, which I looked at earlier this morning, I can say that GTV is privileged to be a friend of Mr. Bharat Bhargava.
Namaskar, I'm Bharat Bhargava. Thanks for joining In Dialogue. Our program today is a birthday tribute to India's first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawahar Lal Nehru. Myself, having been born during the days of India's freedom struggle and having lived in India for 15 years after independence, I do have many memories related with Nehruji. For the benefit of our younger viewers, India gained independence on August 15, 1947. The independence movement was led by people like Mahatma Gandhi, Pandit Nehru, Sardar Patel, Maulana Azad, Sarojini Naidu, Subhash Chandra Bose, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and other leaders, all of whom were the epitome of dedication, integrity, and patriotism. Desh Bhakti and Desh Seva were the only purposes in their lives. For India, these people were like the founding fathers George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and the like for America. You may have heard that on the occasion of Mahatma Gandhi's 70th birthday, Albert Einstein said, "Generations to come, it may well be, will scarce believe that such a man as this one ever in flesh and blood walked upon this earth." Growing up, it used to be so heartwarming listening to Mahatma Gandhi over the radio daily during his prayer meetings called Pratna Sabha. Then, sadly, only 5 months after independence, Gandhiji was gone. Pandit Nehru was named the Prime Minister of India upon India's independence. Today, 66 years after independence, I know newer generations may understandably take India's independence as a given and may rightfully ask the country's leaders, "What have you done for us lately?" And we know that renewed vision, reinvigorated strategies, and managerial impetus will constantly be needed for India to keep leaping forward. However, at the crucial junction of independence, Nehruji and his team did address wide-ranging important national needs and issues, taking into account the condition India found itself in after centuries of neglect. They laid the foundation of India's democracy, which is viewed as a marvel worldwide today. Pandit Nehru's vision and legacy are evident in so many facets of India today. For example, in the establishment of the world-renowned IITs. He called IIT's first campus in Kharagpur a fine monument representing India's urges, India's future in the making, and a symbol of the changes that are coming to India. Before independence, by contrast, the education in India was geared to producing subservient clerks, the babus, that the British government needed, not able managers, engineers, and so forth. Having given this context, I'd like to focus on some personal human interest experiences. One has lived as long as I have, one has had plenty of time to pile up experiences. Just so you know, all the communications that took place were in Hindi, but I may quote their literal translations in English from time to time. I recall seeing Nehruji closely for the first time at the Congress Convention in 1948. That was held in Gandhinagar, Jaipur. Today, we think in terms of Congress, BJP, Janata Party, and so on. Back then, it was not a partisan context. They were all simply freedom fighters who had just won independence jointly, of course, with full public support. Also, by the way, in those days, the area where we now have Gandhinagar and Bapunagar with this sprawling University of Rajasthan campus and beautiful residential colonies after colonies, there was just miles and miles of uninterrupted desert. On January 26, 1950, called the Republic Day, India's new constitution was adopted, and during 1951-52, the first national elections were to take place. In those days, a vast number of women were listed on the voters list not by their own names, but as Mrs. Thus and so. At one point, the electoral office decided that unless a person's own name was on the list, they could not vote. My father, who was a prominent educationist, later a university dean, was also an avid advocate of women's causes. So when he read the news about the voter list, he was most disturbed because it meant that hundreds of thousands of women were going to be disenfranchised. As a former freedom fighter and a member of Jaipur Legislative Council, my mother had been promoting reforms socially and legislatively, and my father was her huge supporter, so he suggested that she should approach the national government to remedy this voter list problem. But to make the long story short, my mother got an appointment from the PM's office and took a Mahila Matadhikar delegation to New Delhi by train. As I recall, there were 15 or so women on it. My mother asked me to come with the delegation. I don't know whether it was because you always need a man to accompany women. Some men. I was only 14. Later on, I got it. They just needed someone to run over and get kullad ki chai for them from platforms at every station. Because the rest of them were women, during the trip, they all started calling me Bharti Bain. The delegation did meet with the PM, who was also unhappy to learn about the situation. He took a great deal of interest in the matter and promised to get the registration reopened so that the list could be corrected as much as possible. As young teenagers, when our mother was Member of Parliament, we siblings spent parts of our summers in New Delhi. Being very near our home, we also used to go to the Parliament House from time to time. Sansad Bhavan had 3 halls: Rajya Sabha, like our Senate here, Lok Sabha, like the House of Representatives, and a larger chamber called the Central Hall, which was used for joint sessions whenever they were held. Ordinarily, the Central Hall remained empty, so when we went to the Parliament, we could hang around there in the Central Hall. Here is a picture of the Central Hall when President Obama addressed the joint session in 2010. Oh, by the way, the large pictures you see in the back of Sarojini Naidu and others were still there. Some are new. So we used to hang around in Central Hall because also there was Shashi Ram's cafeteria right next to it, and we could buy snacks as well as something new, ice cream, coffee. Nehruji's office was in the nearby south block of the Secretariat, but he did spend quite a bit of time in the Parliament when it was in session. Many times, when not in the Lok Sabha chamber, he used to confer with various leaders and ministers like Govind Ballabh Pant, Lal Bahadur Shastri, and Jagjivan Ramji informally on one of the seats right there in the Central Hall. Of course, we never voluntarily went close to them, but some of them did kind things to us, being their colleagues' children. I must admit, just remembering that incredible nazara of those days gives me goosebumps even to this date. The next occasion came in mid-50s. India used to have, and may still have, a large population of gypsies or nomadic tribes like Banjaras. One such tribe was Gardia Lohars. Vocationally, they were ironsmiths who for hundreds of years had been living on their bullock carts, moving from place to place, making and repairing agricultural and household implements. Knowing how difficult life was for their families, Nehruji decided that they needed to be settled and have homes of their own. So a major ceremony was organized at the site of the huge fort in Ranthambore. Tens of thousands of Gardia Lohar family members gathered out in the open, and Nehruji was supposed to make a speech to them from the top of the fort. Because it was in Rajasthan, my mother joined Nehruji, and she also asked me to accompany her. As we were climbing toward the top of the fort, something happened. I don't know if it's common now or not, but in those days during summer, ice was sold in large blocks with burrada or sawdust covering it, and then users would break them up as needed. As we passed through a room, we saw a waiter who was getting drinks ready for serving. He had a large chunk of ice in his left hand and a soda bottle in his right hand, and he was going like this. As kids, we used to see this kind of thing all the time. But it might be that Nehruji never saw that. So when he saw this waiter, he paused, smiled, and asked the waiter, "Kyun bhai, baraf tod rahe ho ki botal tod rahe ho?" The man was so flustered at Nehruji asking him this, he did not know what to say. He just got up and simply ran out of the room. A few minutes later, we went up and Nehruji was to sit on the wide sill of a large window so he could be visible to the Gardia Lohars who were gathered outside. I was standing right next to him. During those days, I used to read Cairo's palmistry book avidly, and given the way Nehruji was sitting, by chance, his palm was open facing toward me. Instinctively, I started staring at it, and not fully realizing myself, I kept on leaning closer and closer to his palm until he noticed and immediately turned his hand upside down. Later on, he gave a speech to the Gardia Lohars. I remember clearly that other than telling them that settling down would be good for them, almost nothing he said would have made any sense to them. It seemed like he had not been able to think of things that the literate people like them could relate to. Then, out of nowhere, he says, "Aur haan, do not believe in astrology and superstitions. You can govern your own fate." I don't suppose that was the case, but at the time I did wonder whether he had understood what I was doing, peering at his palm so intently and so unmannerly. Let me share a couple of tiny anecdotes told to us by our mother. One of the greatest statesmen of the world stage, Nehruji, also had a folksy UPian side to him. He was from Allahabad and he knew my mother was originally from Lucknow. So one day Nehruji said to her, "Sharda, sattu khaye hue bahut din ho gaye." They both chuckled about it, and she said that when she goes to Jaipur next weekend, she would have some sattu made and bring back. Which she did, and Nehruji later on told her how much he enjoyed eating it, maybe after decades. Soon after my mother became vice chairman of Rajya Sabha, Nehruji, passing in the hall, once said to her, "Sharda, hum tumhari chairmanship ki badi tareef sun rahe hain." To which my mother said, "धन्यवाद, मगर पंडित जी अब एक मुश्किल हो गई है. सारे एमपी मुझे जान गए हैं और मुझे नाम लेके नमस्ते करते हैं और मैं उनके नाम नहीं जानती तो बड़ी शर्म आती है." Nehruji said, "मुझे ही कौन से सब याद हैं, मगर चिंता मत करो, सब इस बात को समझते हैं." Okay, so you heard me say the name Pandit Ji. That leads me to something I have wondered about for a long time. How did all the leaders in those days get unique titles or nicknames? Okay, so Nehruji was Pandit Nehru. How about Mahatma Gandhi, Sardar Patel, Acharya Kripalani, Babu Jagjeevan Ram, Netaji Bose, and I can go on and on. There are scores of them. Maybe any of you learned viewers know the answer. In March of 1960, members of Rajya Sabha decided to hold a cultural event at which families of the members were to present dance, music and other items. During some planning meeting for the cultural program, my mother mentioned that I did mono acting. Parents will do that to us every time. During the college days, I did mess around with mono acting and ventriloquism. It appears that dummy must have just said something insulting to me. You simply cannot get these dummies to exercise any control on their tongue. So the committee slotted me to do that. I prepared a routine that would be suitable for the occasion. During the performance, Nehru ji was sitting right in front at the center, front and center in the audience. When I started my item, for the first couple of minutes, everybody else was laughing, but Nehru ji was totally unengaged with me in some other deep thought. I was sweating seeing that. Then soon in my act, a young child was supposed to say something cute about Chacha Nehru. Everybody laughed, and the poet Maithili Sharan ji, who was sitting right next to Nehru ji, busted out laughing and looked straight at him. At that point, Nehru ji ki jaise tandra toot gayi ho, and from that point on, thank God, he gave the most generous responses. The next evening on Choti Holi, Nehru ji had planned a reception and cultural program on the lawn of his own residence at Teen Murti, which is now a museum. So a small ad hoc stage was set up on the lawn for the performances, and the guests were standing watching everything. Nehru ji spotted me standing not far from him. So once a folk dance item was over, he said to Jagjeevan Ramji, who was emceeing the program, "Inka bhi program karao." By the way, Jagjeevan Ramji was the father of the current House Speaker Meera Kumar. Because the last item was a dance, there was no mic on the stage, so Jagjeevan Ramji asked the sound person for a mic to be brought. It was taking a few seconds, so slightly impatiently Nehru ji asked, "Kya der hai?" Jagjeevan Ramji said, "Loudspeaker lagwa rahe hain." In those days, people sometimes loosely call the microphone a loudspeaker, which is what Jagjeevan Ramji did. So Nehru ji says, "Arey chodo, ye to khud hi loudspeaker hain." I hope he meant it as some sort of jocular compliment. The mic was soon there, and I gave an item, different one. Lastly, I'm going to tell you about the biggest personal moments with Nehru ji. That was at our wedding. I'm uncomfortable sharing such a personal situation, but it's 53 years ago as of yesterday, and it was neither mine or my wife Yog's doing. As the bride and bridegroom, we were mere puppets ourselves. Nehru ji, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Govind Vallabh Pant, Shastri ji, Swaran Singh ji, and a few other contemporaries of my mother were among the political guests. Many amusing things happened, so I'll share some pertaining to Nehru ji. As many other guests did for giving blessings, Nehru ji also sat between me and my wife. But since we stayed quiet for a bit, he said, "Arey mere yahan baithne ka fayda kya hai? Ye baat to karte hi nahi hain." My aunt Rama said, "Sharmate hain." To which Nehru ji said, "Arey aajkal koi nahi sharmata hai, baat karo, baat karo." Soon my brother Harsh offered Nehru ji a plate of mithais. When instead of picking a piece, he took the whole plate from him and started passing around to everyone, asking, "Tumne khai ki nahi khai? Tumne khai ki nahi khai?" Only later on we found out that as a security protocol, both in the case of Nehru ji and President Rajendra Prasad, their own cooks had come to make tea for them, and they were not supposed to eat anything. Not knowing that, my aunt extended a samosa plate. He seemed to hesitate a bit and then picked up one samosa and ate. I have to assume his security people must have had a heart attack seeing that. But who could stop him? Alas, 4 years later, Pandit Nehru was no more. Thousands upon thousands of Shraddhanjalis poured from within India and all over the world. As a part of that, one of India's major newspapers repeated his own words that he uttered when we lost Gandhi ji. the light has gone out of our lives. Thank you for joining in dialogue and paying tribute to one of the greatest world figures of all times for his birthday. The day now also known in India as the Children's Day, because Nehru Chacha used to meet with children at the National Stadium on this day. How touching and precious. Visit us at indialogue.net for future schedules and past program videos. Also continue writing to us at bharat@indialogue.net or bharatbhargav@aol.com. Let the Children's Day be one of the best days of your life every single year.